very wise man once said that there's a fine line between stupid and clever. I've been walking that line for some time now, especially in my obsession with the electric guitar. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know what I'm talking about. I've been experimenting with all kinds of processes and materials to make unique guitars. And in this video, I am going to demonstrate the prototypes that I've created using a unique combination of epoxy laminates and entry-level beginner guitars to create some really unique designs. Now, I have been a mediocre guitarist for over 40 years now, and the guitars that I like to make are kind of geared towards mediocre players. They're not super great setups, they don't have great pickups, they're all entry-level guitars, but they do make a great standard platform for future customization and upgrades should someone with a greater skill set want to take them and make something really special. So before I show you the guitars, let me offer a quick disclaimer. If you want to like and subscribe to the videos, that's great. I don't really care. I've got a full-time day job, so I'm just doing this for fun. All these guitars will be thrown up for sale on Reverb. I've got a little shop called Stupid Clever Guitars. For all you folks out at Reverb, I totally respect your love of guitars and what you want, but at the same time, I don't have a lot of time to answer a billion questions about the fret length and all that stuff. These are entry-level guitars. Please, I don't want to offend anybody, but if these don't look like the guitars for you, don't bother buying them, and I'm probably not going to answer a ton of questions about them. With that being said, let me show you my first guitar. So the first guitar I'm going to show you is a series of guitars that kind of represent what you can do just with epoxy and without anything in the epoxy, but molding epoxy and manipulating epoxy with different pigments and stuff to try to make something unique. So this donor guitar was just a bunch of parts actually. It was the body that I used to make silicone molds, as well as a neck that I think I had lying around. I don't even remember where it came from. All of my guitars are bolt-on necks because that's part of the process, is planing off the top part of the guitar to make space for the laminate top. So the epoxy is poured separately in a silicone mold and then manipulated with whatever you want to do. So for this guitar, a clear epoxy top was made, and then look at it shine and glimmer. You can see how thick the top is. This guitar top is about 3/8 of an inch thick. But the back side of the epoxy in the mold was then manipulated with texture and with a Dremel tool to make all those little lines in it. And then a chameleon mica powder added to the back of the epoxy, so that then when covered with black epoxy creates this neat gold top design. So this was my idea for kind of a hammered metal, strange gold top design. And because it was my first effort, I had all kinds of unique, I don't know, they were mistakes, but cool mistakes. And I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It's actually a lot of fun to play. It's just got a kind of an entry-level eBay pickup in there, and kind of with the single volume and tone to make it, because I wanted to highlight the effects of the epoxy. The jankiest part of this guitar is the edges around the body, which I didn't take a lot of time to clean up or to sand really well. I just kind of shot with spray paint. Just because it was a prototype. And through the process, as you'll see, I got much better at protecting the finish on the sides of the bodies as I was trimming the laminate down to the body and making it clean. Anyway, so that was my first prototype. Came out pretty well. I've played this a few times. I've played this quite a bit, actually, use it as a practice guitar, but that's kind of an idea of where you start with. So this next guitar is very, very similar to the first one, in that the laminate top is just made of epoxy. There's nothing in it. However, I used a molding process in the back of the epoxy while it was hardening to create a diamond plate pattern in it. So I actually had a plastic floor mat that had a diamond plate pattern in it, and this was pressed into the epoxy in the back of the epoxy while it was curing, and then another mixture of different colors of mica powder thrown into it. So you see at different angles with the different light, it kind of changes colors from green to yellow with some red and purple in there. Really a funky guitar. And then I kind of threw a entry-level P90 on it with the dog ears on it, kind of to give it a Les Paul Jr. kind of style. Once again, This was actually, this was a Les Paul, Epiphone Les Paul Special, entry-level kind of bolt-on neck guitar, but with a little bit better neck on it that way. But that's another example of what to do with putting a pattern in the epoxy with a mold. And then that can be done. My mind's blown up with all the ideas that I can make with making different molds just to put in the epoxy and then coloring it with mica powder at the end. So there's guitar number 2. So for the third guitar, I decided to try to use a Strat style guitar. And of course, the problem with the Strat style guitar when you're making flat tops is that the body contour and the top part doesn't match up with the flat top of the rest of the guitar. So I had to make an accommodation for that by sanding it down flat and putting my little logo on the wood there. But I like the way it turned out. So this was a very thick pour epoxy that I was experimenting with, just making it blue and metallic, but I didn't like the way it looked just with the blue metallic behind it. So I used a process that I used in a previous epoxy guitar build by hollowing out small circles, different size circles, with Forstner bits in the back of the epoxy, and then filling those circles with different colors of epoxy. Now, what I learned doing this is that when I use just regular pigmented epoxies like this green here, is that the effect wasn't really great. But when I used the epoxies that have mica powder in it, then I got this almost like planetary, cool, raised look effect in there. And that turned out pretty cool. So I got a silver one, there's a gold one, a copper-like shaped one in the back here, and there was one other in there that was metal, I can't remember. But if I were to go back and do this again, I would only use the mica powder epoxy bubbles and create something pretty fancy. Now, because this was a really, really thick, I put multiple pours of epoxy on this. In fact, this almost got to be about a half an inch thick. I ended up having to plane a lot more of the top of the guitar off. And the result of it is this is the heaviest guitar that I got, but it's still wonderfully functional compared to a fully epoxied guitar body. Anyway, that's abomination number 1 here, but the third guitar, I think, in the series. This started out its life as an ion guitar. I don't even know. I was going around picking up used guitars off Facebook Marketplace and then creating them. And you see that I got pretty good at making a nice, clear, clean, shiny finish on all the epoxies, which looks really good. I wanted to maximize the real estate for the effects of the epoxy, so I just plopped in a single hot rail pickup and volume and tone. But that's wonderfully playable, a lot of fun. The routing edges got a little bit janked up there. So like I said before, as I learned my process, I got better at cleaning up these divots that were occurring, but the finish is still pretty in good shape. And there's the back of it, old tobacco sunburst. Number 3. So this is actually one of the last guitars I built. It's another variation on the diamond plate epoxy, just because this is another example of just what you can do with the epoxy itself. But for this guitar, I did keep the full routed out body of the Stratocaster style. This started its life as something called what is it called? A cruise guitar. Okay, whatever, Strat copy. There's the back of it, pretty standard. I got much better at this time by keeping the finish intact. So you can see around the edges, aside from the dings that it had before I got it, because it was a used guitar, it's fine. But the body cavity is a big square, standard kind of Strat body cavity. And because the top of the epoxy is clear and translucent, I decided to add another funky little detail to this one, where I threw in this little switch here. I wrapped some LED fairy lights underneath the pick guard, and when you turn on the lights, it actually glows. So I'm going to shut off the lights here for a second so you can see what that looks like. Ooh, ghost in the machine. So yeah, that's kind of stupid, maybe a little clever, mostly stupid, but why not? So this last example of an epoxy only edition is by all means a complete abomination. This was just a junker 1980s Burstwood guitar that I picked up for 20 bucks, Strat copy. It had some weird electronic like SD card music recorder built into it, which had this extra component in here and batteries in the back and stuff. Pretty much worthless by today's standards. So I picked it up, decided to have a little fun with it. In previous videos, I've made what looked like an acoustasonic guitar. I tried to make an acoustic version of what Fender has been selling for like $3,000. And that video was very, very well received, had a lot of fun with it. But with this guitar, I decided I was going to try to make take a epoxy top like a soundboard and chamber out the guitar body and just glue it to the top and see what happened. What I did do is retain the center block where the bridge sat. In fact, the springs are even hooked up in here, so you could use the tremolo on this, although it's got the tremolo bar has been broken off inside there, so it's not really functional. And then I kind of put a sound hole in the center of the epoxy. So the epoxy top is not a soundboard. The body itself is a soundboard, so it doesn't have a big acoustic sound. But this was a guitar that I made that I could take to my office because I could play around with it and just for fun. And actually, it's got a nice the mica powder in the epoxy itself. And all this was mixed epoxy with mica powder, and it's fairly translucent as well, which is kind of cool. I did take a disc, you can see it right there, a metal disc piezo, I never know how to say that, piezo pickup, and wired it directly to the output jack. So when I plug it in and play it through an acoustic filter, it actually sounds pretty good. This was originally, like I said, a burstwood guitar, which I'd never heard of before, but it's fun, and this will go up for sale on Reverb as well, but it'll be cheap. So now I'm going to show you some guitars that move away just from manipulating epoxy to actually putting stuff in epoxy and seeing what kind of unique things you can do. I've had a friend that built a Lego guitar solely out of Legos, which was really cool, very well received, and I thought, boy, it'd be fun to have the same kind of appearance of a Lego guitar with epoxy. Now, depending on how thick you make your epoxy laminate, and depending how thick the material is that you want to put in it, it's pretty simple. It's as simple as putting whatever you want in the mold whenever you pour the epoxy. So that's what I did with these thin Lego sheets. So this came, and then what I really like about it is with the thickness of it and with the clearness, the transparency of the epoxy, when you look at it on edge, you really get this depth and funky effect with that. But this donor guitar started out as an inexpensive telecopy. I think it was on Amazon even, a glary guitar. And then I eliminated the front pickup and just made it a single pickup because once again, I wanted to, as a demonstration of the epoxy top, really focus on that. Otherwise, I got better still at this point in maintaining the finish along the routing whenever I was cleaning up the top. So this is essentially a new guitar in pretty darn good shape. Not super expensive initial materials, but boy, that body could be used with a new neck and with upgraded electronics and make something really pretty special. Anyway, the Lego guitar. So for this final series of guitars, I'm going to show you what I've done with adding textiles into an epoxy laminate mold. My first attempt at this was the Cattlecter. So while the finish on this guitar was not quite perfect because there are a lot of bubbles that got into the mold of the casting, which you can kind of see. They're kind of subtle, and from a distance you can't see them at all. It still makes a pretty cool guitar. I'll kind of explain how this works. So throwing just a layer of epoxy down in my mold and then gluing some textile to it, I went to Joann's Fabric and got some faux cowhide kind of print. By the way, pro tip, never pay full price at Joann's Fabrics. Just pull up your coupons on your phone and they're going to give you a sweet deal. So you got to be comfortable with Joann's Fabrics. Michael's too. Anyway, the Cattlecter started out as a junker telly body I had lying around. I finished the back of the telly with vinegar and steel wool stain, and then some True Oil just to harden it up. but there's lots of kind of body abnormalities with this because this was beat up because it was used as the body for my Telecaster silicone mold, but it still kind of fits that country western kind of style. But when I made this, I realized that just any textile that you can find, there's a potential for building any guitar you want with textiles, which would be a lot of fun. So I followed that up with my next guitars, which I'm going to show you here in a second. So I think this is probably my favorite textile guitar. I was thinking about how cool it would be to make a guitar that reflected like a flannel shirt or like the grunge scene from the 80s. This started its life as a Les Paul Special, another Epiphone Les Paul Special. And I did keep the original both pickups in here in the full routing pattern for the guitar. I managed to maintain the finish all the way around without any problems. This was actually, I paid maybe $100 for this guitar. This is maybe the most expensive guitar out of the group. But one thing I learned while making the textiles or putting the textiles is whenever it gets soaked in epoxy, it makes it a lot darker. I actually started this plan, so I'll show you this was the original textile and how much darker it got once it was placed under the epoxy. I similarly tried to use a flannel shirt that was kind of dark blue with green in it to go with the red of the body, but whenever it was encased in epoxy, here's the actual unfinished epoxy, it got really, really, really dark. So anytime that you're going to consider putting a textile in epoxy, one guideline would be to soak it in water and just see how it looks soaking wet, because that's the way the color is going to change once it's put in the epoxy. And I have a Blue Jean guitar that I'll show you that did the same thing there. But so now that I've gotten to this point, I've changed the way that I'm making the epoxy laminate. This is epoxy that's poured directly. The textile is glued down to a very, very, very thin piece of plastic or plexiglass placed in the mold, and then the epoxy is poured right on top of it. And this allows the laminate to be actually really, really thin. So these laminates tops are only about 6 millimeters, which means it takes less time to mill the body down to accept the epoxy top, and just less damage to the guitar at all. So really, this is about the time when I'm starting to feel confident that I'm getting the process down the way I like it, and I'm starting to put out some really good stuff. So this guitar is what I like to call the Merricaster, because it's American. It's red, white, and blue jeans. You can see up close now that the whole laminate top, there's even the seam of the blue jean kind of popping through the epoxy. This started its life as a glary guitar. I think that's what it is, yeah. A glary guitar. I think I bought it off Amazon. It is a thin line, semi-hollow body. The finish is in pretty much brand new condition. In addition, you can see the white line of the plastic sheet that the blue jeans was glued to before put in the mold. And I also, I'm now upgrading to a transparent plexiglass to do this with instead of plastic, and plastic sheet from Home Depot actually. But this, I did keep the original front pickup of whole standard kind of Telecaster thing. So this is actually essentially a brand new glary guitar that's just been modified with a new laminate top, and came out looking quite nice. The comment I made about the color change that happens once you go under epoxy is that this is the color of the blue jeans that I used. But just like blue jeans, when they get soaked with water, they turn dark, right? So keep an eye out for that. But the Merricaster is available on Reverb. So for my last guitar, I have the second Cattlecaster, but it is a 12-string. Originally started its life as a King, also sold as a Cozart guitar from China. Get them on eBay for about $150 actually. Kind of a neat little guitar, thin line body. Once again, I sanded off all the Arctic white paint, and I did the vinegar and steel wool stain, also covered with True Oil for protection. You got 6 strings that are mounted into the bridge, and then 6 strings that are strung through the body. And then for extra country western feel, I got some tooled leather to make the pick guard out of. There you can see. Now this is a pretty unique and pretty, I can honestly say probably one of a kind. But by this time I've gotten really down to how to perfect the lamination process with the Textile. So once again, this is a very thin 6mm laminate. There are no bubbles in the finish that there were with the first Cattlecaster, and it came out really, really nice. This guitar is good for both kinds of music, country and western, but I'm sure it could look good on anybody's stage. I would definitely start with, if you're a serious musician, it's going to need new pickups and maybe even new pots. It doesn't sound very good, but all of the basics are there for your enjoyment. So thanks for watching. That's it. I will be putting up new guitars all the time on my Reverb page. If you have ideas for what you'd like to see made in epoxy, please drop me a line. If you are interested in having one made for you, we'll work something out. I'm having too much fun making these, and if you decided that you really wanted to make one yourself, I think I'll be following this video up with a full production video of making a new textile-based guitar using this sweatshirt, this peachy portfolio retro polyester blend hoodie. Might make a pretty cool guitar in itself. Anyway, cheers. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.